Chigudev. So today's verse is from the Srimad Bhagavatam. It's Canto 2, Chapter 4, verse 16. It's a conversation between Maharaj Parikshit and Sukadev Goswami. As we know, the entire Bhagavatam begins this way. And in this conversation, Govinda, Maharaj Parikshit is already realizing some important truths because, of course, he has been listening to the Bhagavatam being recited by Sukadev Goswami attentively for the purpose of his spiritual liberation, for the purpose of his spiritual fulfillment. And so he's listening and he's coming to certain realizations and certain conclusions as he's listening. And so one of the things that he asks Sukadev to explain to him is explain the nature of creation. Why does the Lord play this game? Why, how and why does he project out this reality, describe it in detail? And so in this chapter, he begins to do so. But there's a specific verse that I'm going to read now that addresses the simplicity with which we can actually transcend all of this and that we can attain the purpose of life in some sense, whilst paradoxically being complex. So let's get into it. Vichakshana yacharanopa sadanat sangam vyudasyo bayato nirtatmanaha vindatihi brahmagatim kataklamas tasme subhadra shravase namo namaha. Let me offer my respectful obeisances again and again unto the all-auspicious Lord Shri Hari. The highly intellectual, simply by surrendering unto his lotus feet, are relieved of all attachments to present and future existence, and without difficulty progress towards spiritual existence. He has described previously the complexity, and now he says, those who are highly intellectual, and I'll define that in a second of what is meant by that, because it's important. Two things are said, two words, two expressions. First, simply by surrendering to his lotus feet. Simply is the first word. And the conclusion is, by surrendering to his lotus feet, they are relieved of all attachments to present and future existences, and without difficulty, they progress towards their eternal spiritual existence. Without difficulty. And he says this about those who are highly intellectual. Now, the problem with this is that what that means for most people today is not what it meant to Sukadev Goswami. When we talk about someone who's highly intellectual, and you'll often hear Guruji talk about this, even criticize this, what is he talking about? He's talking about people who very often just have a puffed up ego. All it is this notion that I know more than you. That's enough to be an intellectual these days. At best, they'll have some academic scholarly knowledge. What does that mean? It's a fancy title for, I read some books and I listened to some important people tell me some things. It's all that happens when you go to university. If you get the curriculum sent to your home, you can read the same books, write the same essays. You just won't have that interaction, if you can even call it that. And you do this for 2 or 3 years, then you get to walk out of there and say, I'm an intellectual, I'm a scholar, an academic, and you have a degree to prove it. So in the time of Sukadev Goswami, none of that existed in that way. So Bhagavad Gita explains what is knowledge. And an intellectual person is one who both possesses a well-developed intellect and that intellect is in full alignment with that which has been declared as being knowledge. So first we have to understand what is knowledge. Knowledge is not information. Knowledge is not information, especially not in these contexts. So knowledge is described not only as to understand things, to have certain realizations about what is important and what is not important in life. It also includes how you enact those concepts into tangible behaviors, how that becomes a lifestyle. Now, we may use the term wisdom for that. We usually say that there's a difference between having knowledge, having information, and then being able to put it into practice, and we call that wisdom. But that distinction only really needs to happen because people misunderstand knowledge. Traditionally speaking, when you say the word jnana, this is not something mundane. This is not something small. It's not something petty. I was watching a video with Guruji yesterday. And in the video, this person, he said this phrase that knowledge is power. And we were watching, and of course it's a common expression. It's been used many times. And as we were watching this, I had a little thought. And I looked at Guruji, and he was busy with something else. And I thought to ask him something, and then the thought passed. And so I sat with it. Knowledge is power is a funny old thing because, yes, I've been briefly defining knowledge, but then what is power? What should power really be? And again, most people's conception of power is the ability to do what you want, and especially if it includes imposing what you want over the will of what someone else wants. And that's a pretty accurate measure of power. Because my ability to do something independent from anyone else is great, but if I can do it despite the resistance from others, I'm even more powerful. Right? And power is often measured. In fact, I would say power is exclusively measured in comparison to others. And so it seems like a very competitive principle, a comparative principle. And I was sitting there saying knowledge is power, but how does knowledge become so corrupt that one would use it as power over another? Now, of course, you have the power to help. You have the power to aid and to influence someone positively, to guide them, to instruct them. That's the kind of power Guruji has over us. Of course, we have voluntarily given that power to him. We have given him that position. But in a sense, he has that power whether we give it or not. But he uses power to, as I said, positively impact our lives. And when you look in the mirror and we think, what power do I have and over who? Now, you may become depressed when you realize you may not even have power over yourself. But if you just take one step beyond that depression, let's just ignore that for now. Just try to see the people that you actually have power over, and you do have. Whether it's your peers, whether it's your work colleagues, whether it's your family members, children. And so often the fine line between using the power you have, be that knowledge or some other kind of competence, especially in the broader definition of knowledge that I was touching upon earlier, you have some form of influence over people's lives. And actually, when you listen to Guruji over the years, he's been very careful in making us aware of that power. To not inadvertently influence people's lives, to not manipulate. Because power and manipulation go hand in hand. To manipulate reality to your vision. To manipulate other people to become and act the way you want them to. To manipulate your environment to provide you with the exact circumstances that you want, irrespective of what that may do for others. It's the most common thing in human life. To exert whatever influence you may have to create the most optimal possible situation for yourself. But knowledge is power was the expression. And when you hear Sukadev Goswami speak to Maharaj Parikshit, he says that for those that are highly knowledgeable, highly intellectual, they simply surrender themselves to the lotus feet of the Lord. Isn't that the giving up of power? Surrender is to abandon power in that traditional sense of looking at it as a power to exert something over others or over something, be that people or the environment, as I said. We've been talking about power as something that you impose. Your will imposed externally, manifest to produce your outcomes that you want. But surrender is the entirely opposite thing. It's the entirely opposite force, where you abandon your will at the feet of another, where you say, not how I want, how you want. And the scary part of surrender is precisely that. There is no power in it. Because you no longer have the power to decide anything. And so there seems to be a bit of a paradox, because the more knowledgeable you are, the more intellectual you are, the more in control, the more you understand, technically, as a result of that understanding, that deep-rooted understanding, you naturally get more power. Who are the most influential people in your life? The most competent or the least competent? Who are the most influential people in society? Those that are most qualified or those that are least qualified? It's always rising together with qualification. The reason we look up to our elders is because they have more experience. The reason we look up to Guruji, he has more realization, right? We always look upward. So the more something has, the more influence, the more power, the more etc. But here, as I said, Sukadeva Goswami paints a different picture. The more you have, the more likely you should surrender it. The more likely that you will surrender it. Because that is directly correlated to proper understanding, a proper understanding of reality. And so the outcome is that such persons who are very intelligent and therefore very powerful abandon all that intelligence, abandon all that power, and very easily attain their spiritual perfection. Very easily. And here comes the biggest paradox. The more knowledgeable and powerful you are, the more easy it should be to surrender, right? Because if you have more power, as I said, that also includes power over yourself. So if you have power over yourself, it should be very easy for you to decide what you want to do with yourself and do it. Because you can't say, I don't even have power over myself. Sorry, I can't surrender, God. No, I'm very powerful. I can surrender myself. And I'm very intelligent, so I know that that's actually good for me. And all these other games that mundane people play, the unintelligent people supposedly play, the wise person understands that they're not fruitful, that they're not actually fulfilling anything. So, as I said, the more powerful, the more wise you get, technically, the easier surrender should be. Right? So why do we observe the opposite? Why is it that the less powerful people are, and the more simple they are, simple-minded, the easier they have a time in surrendering? Guruji points that out so often, that very often the people who have the easiest time surrendering are the simplest of people. And he even uses the expression simple-minded, and when you listen, he's just saying that as a polite way of saying they're not very intelligent people. It's true. Why is it then that Krishna, Sukadev, they map out one reality, but our observable one seems to be the opposite? And that is a lesson. Why I've constructed this entire picture, is that there is a lesson here to be had, and the lesson is context. When you take teachings, be they from Guruji, from the Bhagavatam, from the Gita, out of their context, you will not understand anything. If I pull this verse out and say, highly intellectual people, they surrender and very easily attain spiritual life, you'll think, wow, okay. Therefore, I must become highly intellectual, and my spiritual outcomes will be easy. But that would not include all of the teachings and verses about pride, about arrogance, about the need to serve and forget oneself, the necessary ingredients that must accompany knowledge, that must rise simultaneously with knowledge. That as you become highly intellectual, you become highly humble. That as you become highly competent, you become highly service orientated. So that that competence does not get worn as a badge of pride, like the scholar that says, look at my PhD. But rather that as one rises in knowledge and competence, so does one's propensity to serve the next one, to serve the one without such competence. To say, I am gaining these skills, I have been blessed with this gift so that I can share that with you, not so that I can impose myself over you, not that I can show off to you or present myself as being superior to you. That is not why we receive the gifts we receive. We receive the gifts we receive so that we can surrender them at the feet of the Lord in service. The more powerful you get, the more responsibility on your shoulders. And what are you meant to do with that responsibility? You are meant to put it at the feet of the Lord, offer it in service to Him and say, what would you like me to do with all that I have been given? Because I have been given it by you. Every single Leela of Indra, we speak about Indra in the scriptures as if he's some kind of flawed character, constantly making mistakes that the Lord has to create some Leela to clean up. But people forget one thing. Indra is not a bad guy. Giridhari Leela, or look at Indra sending down the rain on the inhabitants of Braj, and then Krishna has to come and humble him. What an idiot. Who gave that idiot his job? Krishna. Krishna appointed him to be the head of all gods. Does that mean he's perfect? No. But he has been given huge responsibility, duty. And if he misunderstands how to enact said duty, the answer is not punishment. It's education. What Krishna does in Giridhari Leela is not punishment to Indra. It's re-education. It's the re-education of Indra. Because he doesn't say, I regret giving you that duty. I regret appointing you to this position. You are not qualified for this position. He doesn't say any of this. He says, let me remind you of the attitude you should have whilst enacting your role. It's the mindset that needs correcting. You don't lack the ability. You lack the perspective. You lack the mindset. A highly intellectual and competent person does not lack intellect or competence. That's why they are termed as such. What they often lack is the right perspective. And when Guruji comes and he criticizes mind people, knowledge people, book people, academics, intellectuals, etc., he's not criticizing their skills. You understand? Because he will also then turn to the simple-minded person and say, why aren't you studying? Isn't it? Govinda. It's not a condemnation of knowledge. It's a condemnation of the knowledgeable, of the person who possesses the knowledge and enacts it in the wrong way because they have the wrong perspective, the wrong attitude. It's a criticism of the attitude, not of the skills. And he will still push you to acquire the skills. He will still push you to elevate yourself, become wiser. Because if you are not wise, you will be ensnared by everything that the world has to offer to you. And then what is the use of your bhakti? What is the use of any of it? If so easily you can be tempted away by something else because you don't understand your nature. You don't understand the nature of this reality. You don't understand the nature of your relationship towards this reality. These things are not trivial. It's fundamental that we understand tattva. Who am I? What is this place? What is our connection? What is tamas guna? What is rajas? What is sattva? Very clearly, so that I understand what parts of me fall into each category, so that I understand how and why. But let that knowledge never live in isolation from the simplicity of offering a flower to Krishna with love. Let it never stand in isolation from Krishna in chapter 13, defining knowledge as including humility, including service to the spiritual master. Acharya Upasana, as including so many behavioral principles. Knowledge is not, please study Bhagavad Gita and memorize some verses. That is not knowledge. That is a piece of knowledge. And so it is very, very important that we understand these distinctions. So many people navigate these fields of, oh, should I pursue this knowledge, or should I do this, or should I do that, in a very simplistic way, and often unsophisticated. And the problem with that is that you reach very gross outcomes instead of subtle outcomes, instead of precise outcomes. You reach general outcomes, like, I've made some general improvement, but not in very concrete and specific ways, which you have to aim for. You have to actually try to overcome the specific deficiencies that you have on your spiritual path. Now, this may seem a little complex or a little too detailed. Why can't things be easier? This is an expression I often hear from people. Why can't things be easy? You know who finds things easy? People that are very competent. Everything is easy for them. You know who doesn't find things easy? Incompetent people. Because they face a task and they're like, I have no clue how to fulfill this task. This is also complicated. And so the incompetent people complain, why are things so difficult? And the competent people become arrogant because everything is so easy for them. Isn't it? So what's wrong about both of them? It's the same thing. Perspective, attitude. It's not wrong that you're incompetent. It's wrong to not do anything about it. Do you understand? It's not wrong that you lack a skill. It's wrong that you don't care to do anything about it. It's wrong that you don't care to improve your service, that you don't improve yourself as a human being in the service of the Lord, in the service of others. This is wrong. And it's not wrong to be competent. It's wrong to think that that makes you superior. Attitude. It always comes back to attitude. And when you listen to Guruji attentively, you'll find that 9 times out of 10, he's only criticizing your attitude. He doesn't sit here and say, how dare you all not know how to chant the Sri Suktam by heart? How dare you not memorize the Bhagavad Gita? He doesn't say that. He says, you know, lazy people who don't even want to study the Bhagavad Gita. Lazy people who don't even want to do their sadhana. That doesn't mean you're not doing your sadhana well, or I'm not happy with the quality of your studies. It means I'm unhappy with your lack of willingness to do that. That's attitude. And so once you have put these pieces of the puzzle together and you understand that attitude is the most important ingredient for spiritual life, attitude, the road to becoming a highly intellectual person, not by today's standards, by Sukadeva Goswami standards, by Bhagavad Gita standards, and therefore make your spiritual life easy, is very simple. It's quick. And then when you achieve that, which is not a faraway goal at all, when you achieve the simplicity of life that comes from that knowledge, from that competence, I only remind you that you will once again bump into the same problem of attitude. The first problem of attitude was, I'm too bored, I'm too lazy, I'm too lethargic, I'm too negligent. So motivation. Once you get the motivation and you pursue and you achieve, remind yourself, warn yourself, arrogance, arrogance, pride, pride, ego, ego. These are the pitfalls of those that have achieved something in life. What do you see Guruji always saying about people that are near to him? They can take the fire That's why they're there. But they wouldn't have to take any fire if there wasn't any fire. So why is there fire? To keep them humble. Because if it's all roses and beautiful sunsets, then the pride is able to flourish. But if you're constantly in the middle of a fire, which is, by the way, exactly what it feels like to hang out with Guruji for longer than 5 minutes. Okay? 5 minutes is great. 10 minutes, half an hour at a stretch. After that, it starts to get hot in here. Yesterday, we had a very funny exchange. I have to end on this. I was going to end without it, but I'll share it. We was with Guruji, and Guruji, he was in a good mood at lunchtime. Dinner time, less so. A little impatient, edgy. We get there, and he says, sometimes I say I don't like people, but I'm starting to think I don't like you people. This is the thing. It's starting to happen to me now that I really don't like you people. And I'm looking at him and I'm like, starting now. It's been like this for quite some time, Guruji. And he was like, oh, could be. And then we sit down, there's this weird atmosphere in the room because some people obviously take it better than others, normal. You see it in their faces, they're like, oh, he doesn't like me anymore. And some people are like, this is not news, right? This is fine. And by the way, these are the people who he invites for dinner. Imagine who anyway. As I've always said, he loves everyone, doesn't mean he likes everyone, right? These are two separate things. So we're sitting there, and then he's sitting there and he turns to one of the Prabhus and he says to him, maybe I'm just getting old. Because this is what old people do, isn't it? They get more impatient, they don't like being around people. And the Prabhu said, yeah, Guruji, I'm the same. Sometimes I don't like seeing anybody's face. And then they laughed together and Guruji starts laughing and he says, I'm just getting old. Ha 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 ha, right? And I sat there thinking to myself, maybe I'm older than I think then. There wasn't much point to this story, it was more just to share. But nonetheless, as I was saying, there's fire around him always. Fire constantly. And even a sentence like that, I don't think I like you people anymore. Eventually it turned into a funny joke, but for as long as that sentence lasted without the joking outcome, it's a fire. It's a fire for people because they have to sit in his presence with this thought churning in their mind, he doesn't like me. He doesn't like me being here, and yet I have to be here because he invited me and I will not say no. No, but it's an important point. It's entire part of his mechanism of how he works with us and why I say it's not for everyone and it's not a simple thing. And as I said, as you start to achieve things in life or you accomplish something, you have to be wary of ego. And Guruji is so masterful because he always creates the environments where the most arrogant, proud person will walk into that room, hear that sentence, and sit down questioning their entire life. Doubting themselves because he says one sentence. But that's how he keeps you in check. That's how he keeps you humble. He's just as likely to smile at you and follow up that smile with, okay, now go back to your seva. And you're like, oh, because you create the fantasy, oh, he really wants to hang out with me right now. And the next sentence is, what you're doing here, go do your duty, right? And you come back to earth. But this is all very, very important. And this is also why Krishna's prime instruction is, if you want to see the truth and you want to become wise, what should you do? Approach one who has realized that truth. He will instruct you. Don't approach that truth directly. Approach one who instructs you into that truth. Because the difficulty is not that you won't be able to acquire the knowledge or acquire the skills. You can do that by yourself. You won't acquire the perspective of how to live those things out, you won't see the stain on your own nose, right? Someone needs to be there to point it to you. You have a little bit of ego on your nose. Jai Gurudev.